How's it going, everyone? It's Damo here with a very special video where we're going to be having a look at bowgun damage calculation. You'll see it's part one, and that's because we're going to have raw damage calculated today, and then for the next video we're going to be having a look at elemental damage. If you guys want something that's going to be more focused for melee weapons, I would recommend checking out Sash's video. There's going to be a lot of overlap between the two videos, however there's also a lot of things that separate gun damage from melee weapon damage. We'll be going over a lot of those today. Here's just our basic contents. So, starting off with a very simplified version of the raw damage formula, then going into breaking down the attack stat, motion values, monster hit zones, critical damage, and average damage. So let's get right into it. This is a really simplified version of the raw damage formula, and it's essentially based on three things: how much power you have, how powerful the move you're going to use is going to be, and then the monster hit zones. A very easy way of saying that is just, attack times motion value times hit zone equals the damage you're going to do. Quick example here, if we've got a heavy bowgun with 220 attack using normal ammo level 1 on the training dummy, it's going to be 220 because that's your attack stat, 17 because that's the motion value, and all motion values are percentages, so 17%. Then we're going to multiply by 80% because the hit zone of the training dummy is 80, and that's also a percentage, and that's going to give us 29.92. Bowgun damage is rounded to one decimal place at the end of calculations. I don't know if melee is the same. I have heard that melee is a little bit different, and that's probably due to having things like sharpness. They have to consider sharpness, whereas the guns do not. So that is where we're already starting to see a bit of differentiation between melee and guns. Now when we go and we have a look at the attack stat, this is going to perfectly overlap with melee. So if you want a more in-depth thing, once again, go check out Sash's video. It's pretty much just how do we calculate our attack stat? Weapon attack times by our percentage increases, then plus our flat additions, and that's going to give you your attack stat. So again, we have that gun with 220 attack, but we're also going to have attack boost 5, agitator 5, and our gut set bonus. We can see there, 220 attack times by, and you see it's the product of both these percentage increases. That is also the same for melee, and that's very important, right? So that's why we've got the 1.04, because attack boost 5 is a 4% increase, and then times 1.05 because gut set bonus is a 5% increase. Those two are going to multiply. Then we're going to add on the flat part from attack boost 5, which is plus 9, and then the flat 20 from agitator 5, and that's going to give us 269.24. I don't know if this gets rounded on melee weapons, but it definitely doesn't get rounded on our bowguns. It will actually be used as 269.24. There's a couple of skills that are going to affect bowguns, or just, affect bowguns and not affect melee, or affect bowguns differently to how they affect melee. And I've shown them there on the top right. Note that opening shot and tetrad shot do more than just give us attack. However, for this specific slide, it's most important to consider what their effect is on the attack stat. Now we're going to look at motion values, and this is where guns are going to differ a lot from our melee counterparts. So motion value is essentially a number that represents how hard the move you're going to use is going to hit. So a greatsword's true charge slash is going to have a much higher motion value than a basic little stab from the dual blades. But, the game's balanced, of course. Greatsword attacks slowly, dual blades attack really quickly. So fast attacks have a lower motion value, slower attacks have a high motion value. For the most part, there are exceptions. I'm looking at you, Insect Glaive. What I've got here is just a little table that's going to show the different motion values for heavy bowguns raw ammo. And I'm going to thank my mate, Unkempt Herald. This has come straight from his datasheet. I'll be putting a link to that in the description. Now, where bowguns get very interesting is that they have a lot of modifiers on their motion values. Melee players literally have no motion value changes. Maybe, if you got a true charge slash and you charge it up, then you could consider that as a modifier to the motion value. But really, they just have different motion values. true charge slash if you have, one glow of charge, it's going to, be more powerful and have a different modifier, and they're set modifiers, right? Like set different numbers from their motion values. But heavy and light bowgun are really interesting because they have armor skills that directly increase them or decrease. Actually, no, they're all increase. They all increase their motion values. So things like shot type up, that's normal, pierce, or spread shots, increase motion values by 5%. Same with rapid fire up when you're in rapid fire mode. Then you've also got special ammo boost, heavy bowgun standard ST1 or 2, and heavy bowgun ignition mode ST1 or 2. All of those can increase the motion values of what they correspond to by 10 or 20% depending on the level. Then you're going to have pierce ammo tick decay. So basically, if you go and shoot the training dummy with pierce ammo, you expect all the shots that hit the main part of the training dummy to do the same damage, but they actually don't do the same damage, and that's going to be because the motion value of later ticks go down. You can see exactly by how much that is on Harold's sheet. He actually, lays it out nicely for you. But essentially, the reason why the damage goes down is because there is a multiplier to the motion value that decreases it. Critical distance also directly affects motion values. It is not a multiplier at the end of your damage. It's actually just changing these numbers that you see here on screen. Now, the thing is that in the damage formula that I mentioned earlier, in fact, I'll go back to that slide. Not this one right here. Everything is multiplied. So if we simply just put a, multiplier, maybe out here, wouldn't that give us the same number? And for the most part, guys, it does. But when we start looking at elemental damage, it's not going to give us the same damage if we are to just simply put it out here. So let's put it in the correct place and understand that it's simply going to change this number here, the motion value. For basic raw calculations, it won't make a difference. But for, more in-depth elemental calculations, it will make a big difference. So let's just make sure that we do it correctly for raw so that when we start doing it for element, we don't make any mistakes there. All right, so that's the end for motion values. Quickly before we move on from here is just how I actually was able to test this. So the frenzy virus is cured not from the number of times you hit the monster and not from the amount of damage you deal to the monster, but actually by how much motion value you do to the monster. And that's how I was able to test all of these and see that they were actually motion value changes. And a quick way that you can test if it is number of hits or if it's based on damage is just take, say pierce ammo. You know that pierce ammo, the shots are weaker, as indicated by the low motion values here, but there's a lot of shots. And then compare that to spread or, normal, and you'll see that it's not bad. Have a look at, the number of shots as for when it does cure frenzy, and you'll see that the number of hits on the monster is significantly higher for pierce because they have lower motion value. So it's not based on number of hits. You can then test to see if it's based on the amount of damage done by running, a stronger build and a weaker build, and you'll see that it's the same number of hits there if both of them are using pierce ammo level 3. So it's not to do with damage, it's not to do with number of hits, but it's to do with motion value. And one thing that I found really interesting is that, I'll go and put up like a spread build and I start hitting the monster. But then if you put spread shots on the build, you're actually going to cure frenzy faster. However, this isn't going to make a huge impact on your builds because it's only 5% faster. And most of the time, especially with spread 3 doing 7 shots, like 7 hits to the monster, it's not even going to make up 1 shot. Like I had to be really precise with my testing to be able to actually, see these changes here. Next thing we're going to be talking about, guys, is hit zones. So, hit zones, it's pretty simple. Depending on 3 things: where you hit, what you hit it with, and the state of the body part. So where you hit, typically the head is going to be a weak zone or, one of the better hit zones for you to hit. It's going to have a higher number that is, allocated to it. So where you hit, what you hit it with. Now that's going to be because, guns have, different hit zones to their melee counterparts. They're typically going to be lower than their melee counterparts, and that's just, how the whole game has been designed. For the most part, it's not going to be a huge issue, but it can get quite annoying, specifically against Jinderhard. Whilst we can do really good damage to its head and tail with spread ammo because it is a weak spot, of 45 or above, the thing is that melee players can also proc weakness exploit on the arms and legs of Jinderhard, and when you break those, you get a topple. So it's a little bit unfortunate for us there, but for the most part, it's going to be fine. And on a monster like Raydao, it's completely fine. And then the last thing we've got to look at is the state of the body part. So that's the thing, I've got the head here, and this is Raydao's head from Karaniko. And you can see how the actual number changes depending on what's happening to the head. If it's just, the head and nothing's changed, it's going to be a hit zone of 50. If there's a wound there, then it's going to be 60. And then if it's a weak point, now the weak point's going to be after it does like a big lightning attack and, you see its head glowing red, then it's actually going to be a hit zone of 70. So it's important to note that monster hit zones will actually vary as the hunt goes on. Next thing we're going to look at, guys, is critical damage. So you're essentially just, getting your base damage and multiplying it by the critical modifier. I'm just going to make it very clear here, guys. You do have to essentially recalculate the base damage and then also multiply by that critical modifier. You don't use the base damage and then just multiply that, because remember that base damage is rounded, and then if you multiply it by, a rounded number, then you're going to get some errors there, and you're often going to be off by about 0.1, maybe 0.2 damage in a really, crazy scenario. But for the most part, you're going to be about 0.1 off. Sometimes you're going to be bang on. But the way to be perfectly accurate is to multiply it all out again, and again, only round right at the end. I've got a little example here just showing, if you have critical boost 5, then you're going to end up getting 41.888, and then that's going to round to 41.9 because, once again, damage is rounded to one decimal place at the very end of calculation, and that is the only rounding that is done with bowguns. Last thing we're going to look at today, guys, is average damage. So this is where we're going to be, balancing out our base damage and our critical damage with our affinity to work out what our average damage is. So, I've got a quick example here, which is going to be that, same heavy bowgun with 220 attack using normal ammo 1 on the training dummy. We got crit boost 5, and in this case, we're assuming that we have 30% affinity active. So, we could be have 3 points of max might, and that's considered active for this calculation. So we have our 29.9. Notice that that's the rounded number because that's what's going to be used here, times by the 1 minus 30%, which is essentially how often are we not going to crit. So we get our non-critical damage multiplied by how often we're not going to crit. And then we're going to add our 41.9, that's rounded from the previous slide, times by how often we are going to crit, 30%. When you do that calculation, you get 33.5. Interestingly enough, that is not a rounded number. This calculation just came out really nice. Now, it's not essential to round, these kind of things, but it often is still done anyway for presentation purposes. I do also want to stress that this is not a number that you're going to see. Sorry, I know my mic is playing up a little bit here, but this is a number that you are not going to see in game, but it is important to maximize this when you're optimizing builds. Couple other notes here is that affinity skills are going to be conditional. So this was done with maximum might on. We assume that maximum might is on. But, when you do go to calculate average damage like this, you often need to consider your skill up times, which is something that my spreadsheet does. I'll link that in the description as well. It's also worth noting, guys, that Tetrad shot gives 8, 10, or 12% affinity depending on level from shots 4 and onwards. So not just shots 4 and 6 like it does with the raw attack bonus, but actually shots 4 and onwards. So if you have a clip of 8, this affinity boost is going to work on shots 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. That's going to finish us up for today, guys. If you enjoyed the video, please let me know by leaving a like, comment, or whatever, even a DM in Discord. It's really important because the elemental version of a video like this is going to take a lot longer to make. It's going to be a lot more effort, but obviously that's where a lot of people have questions regarding bowgun damage calculation. So if there is enough interest in it, I'm happy to make that video, and I'll be judging that based on how this video goes. So, see you guys next time. Peace out.